On a quiet Monday morning, the streets of Chicago buzzed with the usual rhythm of people heading to work, school, or running errands. Margaret Thompson, a 68-year-old retired schoolteacher, was among them. She had lived in the city her entire life and knew its routines as well as she knew her own. Every Monday, without fail, Margaret would take the bus to her book club meeting at the local library. It was one of the highlights of her week, a chance to connect with friends, share stories, and escape into the world of literature. Margaret woke up early that day, just like she always did. She made herself a cup of tea, fed her cat, Whiskers, and carefully packed her purse with everything she might need for the day: her reading glasses, a small notebook, a pen, and her wallet. She slipped on her favorite beige coat, the one with the buttons that matched her hat, and stepped out into the crisp autumn air. The leaves were beginning to turn shades of orange and red, and the cool breeze carried the faint scent of fallen foliage. It was the kind of morning that felt peaceful, almost magical. The bus stop wasn't far from her apartment, so Margaret walked there slowly, enjoying the fresh air. As she approached, she noticed a few other people waiting, a young man scrolling through his phone, a mother trying to keep her toddler entertained, and an older gentleman reading a newspaper. Margaret smiled politely at them but didn't say much. She preferred to keep to herself during these short waits, using the time to observe the world around her. When the bus finally arrived, it pulled up with a familiar hiss of brakes. Margaret climbed aboard, paid her fare, and found a seat near the front. She liked sitting there because it gave her a good view of the city outside the window. As the bus rattled down the street, she settled into her seat, pulling out a paperback novel from her purse. It was a mystery story, and she was eager to dive back into its pages. But today, something felt different. There were two men sitting across the aisle who caught Margaret's attention, not because they were loud or disruptive, but because they seemed oddly out of place. One was a tall, muscular man with a warm smile and a shaved head. The other was equally imposing, with short, dark hair and a confident demeanor. They were chatting quietly, their conversation casual and friendly. Margaret couldn't quite place why they looked familiar, but she shrugged it off, thinking maybe they were actors or athletes she'd seen on TV once. As the bus continued its route, more passengers boarded. Some took seats while others stood, holding onto the overhead railings. Among the new arrivals was a man who immediately drew everyone's attention. His name was Jake Miller, though no one on the bus knew that yet. Jake was tall and broad-shouldered, with tattoos covering most of his arms. He wore a leather jacket and heavy boots, and his presence seemed to fill the space around him. His face was hard, his jaw clenched tightly, and his eyes darted around the bus as if searching for something or someone to blame for his obvious frustration. Jake hadn't had a good night. He had spent hours at a bar, drinking too much and arguing with his friends. By the time he left, his temper was simmering just below the surface. Now, standing on the crowded bus, he felt trapped and irritated. No one had offered him a seat, and the lack of personal space only added to his growing anger. He muttered under his breath, glaring at the passengers around him as if daring them to look his way. Margaret tried not to pay him any mind. She kept her focus on her book, hoping the tension in the air would pass quickly. But fate had other plans. As the bus hit a bump in the road, Margaret shifted slightly in her seat, accidentally nudging Jake with her elbow. It was a small, unintentional movement, but to Jake it felt like a deliberate act of aggression. "What the hell is your problem?" he snapped, turning to face her. His voice was loud enough to silence the murmurs of conversation on the bus. Margaret froze, her heart pounding in her chest. She looked up at him, wide-eyed and unsure of what to say. I'm sorry," she stammered, clutching her purse tightly. It was an accident. But Jake wasn't interested in apologies. His anger boiled over and he leaned closer to her, invading her personal space. "You need to watch where you're going, old lady," he growled, his words dripping with venom. Margaret flinched, shrinking back into her seat as tears welled up in her eyes. The rest of the passengers watched, in stunned silence. Some turned away, pretending not to notice, while others exchanged nervous glances. No one dared to intervene, Not yet, anyway. The tension on the bus was palpable, like a storm waiting to break. Across the aisle, the two men who had seemed so out of place earlier exchanged a quick look. They had heard every word and seen the fear in Margaret's eyes. For a moment, neither of them moved. They were strangers on a bus, after all, and getting involved could lead to trouble. But deep down, they both knew they couldn't sit idly by while an elderly woman was being bullied. The taller of the two men shifted slightly in his seat, his jaw tightening as he considered what to do. The other man placed a hand on his arm, silently urging caution. Whatever happened next, they would have to be smart about it. This wasn't a movie or a wrestling ring. It was real life, and the stakes were high. For now, the situation remained unresolved. Jake stood towering over Margaret, his rage unchecked, while the rest of the bus held its collective breath. What none of them realized, least of all Jake, was that help was already on the way. Two unlikely heroes were preparing to step in, ready to prove that sometimes doing the right thing requires courage, compassion, and a willingness to stand up for those who can't defend themselves. And so, the stage was set for a confrontation that would change the lives of everyone on that bus, and perhaps inspire others far beyond the confines of its metal walls. Jake's harsh words hung in the air like a dark cloud, suffocating the calm that had once filled the bus. Margaret sat frozen in her seat, her frail hands gripping the edges of her purse as if it were a lifeline. Her eyes darted around the bus, searching for help, but most passengers avoided her gaze. Some looked down at their phones, pretending to be absorbed in something important. Others stared out the windows, unwilling to get involved. The fear in Margaret's expression was clear, and yet no one stepped forward. Jake seemed to feed off the silence, growing bolder with each passing second. He leaned even closer to Margaret, his voice rising as he continued his tirade. "You think you can just bump into me and not say anything? Huh?" he demanded, his tone dripping with mockery. Margaret tried to respond, but her voice trembled too much to form coherent words. She could only manage a soft, "I'm sorry." The two men sitting across from Margaret exchanged another glance. The taller man, Dwayne, was visibly struggling to keep his composure. His jaw tightened and his fists clenched slightly as he watched Jake intimidate the elderly woman. John, the other man, placed a hand on Dwayne's arm again, silently reminding him to stay calm. They both knew this wasn't the time to act rashly, but they also couldn't let the situation escalate further. Jake, however, showed no signs of backing down. Instead, he reached out and grabbed Margaret's purse, yanking it away from her trembling hands. The sudden movement startled her, and she gasped, tears streaming down her cheeks. The contents of the purse spilled onto the floor. A wallet, a pack of tissues, a small bottle of hand sanitizer, and a few coins rolled across the aisle. Margaret instinctively reached for her belongings, but Jake blocked her path, sneering down at her. "You want this back?" he taunted, holding the purse above his head where she couldn't reach it. "Then maybe you should learn some respect." His cruel laughter echoed through the bus, making the other passengers shift uncomfortably in their seats. A few murmured under their breath, but no one dared to confront him directly. Margaret's face crumpled as she realized she was powerless against Jake's aggression. She bent down slowly, trying to gather her scattered items while fighting back. Tears. Her hands shook so badly that she dropped a coin twice before finally managing to pick it up. The humiliation was written all over her face, and it was painful to watch. Dwayne couldn't take it anymore. He rose from his seat, his towering frame drawing immediate attention. The sound of his chair scraping against the floor caused everyone to look up, including Jake. For a moment, there was complete silence. All eyes were on Dwayne as he took a step forward, his presence commanding and undeniable. "Hey," Dwayne said, his deep voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "That's enough." Jake turned to face him, his smirk faltering slightly when he realized who was speaking. Even though he didn't know Dwayne personally, he recognized him instantly. It was hard not to. His muscular build and confident demeanor made him stand out in any crowd. But Jake refused to back down, even when faced with someone so obviously stronger than him. Instead, he squared his shoulders and narrowed his eyes. "What's it to you?" Jake shot back, his voice laced with defiance. Mind your own business. Dwayne didn't flinch. He took another step closer, standing between Jake and Margaret. His expression was calm but firm, radiating authority without needing to raise his voice. This is my business, he replied evenly. You don't talk to her like that, and you sure as hell don't treat her like this. Before Jake could respond, John stood up too, joining Dwayne's side. Together they formed an imposing wall of muscle and determination. John crossed his arms over his chest and fixed Jake with a steely glare. Yeah, pal, he added, his tone matching Dwayne's seriousness. Apologize and give her back her purse. Now. The rest of the bus erupted into whispers. People began recognizing the two men and realized they weren't just ordinary passengers. They were celebrities. Dwayne Johnson, better known as The Rock, and John Cena, both household names, were standing up for Margaret. The realization spread quickly, and soon everyone was watching intently, waiting to see what would happen next. Jake hesitated, clearly caught off guard. He glanced around the bus, noticing the stares of the other passengers. Some were glaring at him, while others looked hopeful, silently cheering on Dwayne and John. For a brief moment it seemed like Jake might actually listen. But then his pride kicked in and he straightened up, attempting to regain control of the situation. You think I'm scared of you two? Jake spat, his bravado returning. Go ahead, try something, see what happens. Dwayne raised an eyebrow, unimpressed by Jake's attempt to intimidate him. Oh, we're not going to try anything, he said calmly. But trust me, you don't want to find out what happens when you mess with the wrong people. John knelt beside Margaret, gently, helping her collect the last of her belongings. He handed her the wallet and tissues, offering her a reassuring smile. Are you okay, ma'am? He asked softly. Margaret nodded weakly, still shaken but grateful for his kindness. She clutched her purse tightly to her chest as John helped her back into her seat. Meanwhile, Dwayne kept his focus on Jake, who was starting to realize he was outnumbered, not just by Dwayne and John, but by the entire bus. Sensing the shift in momentum, Dwayne addressed the other passengers. Does anyone here think this guy deserves to walk away without consequences? He asked loudly. To everyone's surprise, several people shouted no, in unison. One man stood up and pointed at Jake, saying, You've got no right to treat her like that. Another woman chimed in, adding, She didn't do anything to you. The chorus of disapproval grew louder, emboldening those who had initially been too afraid to speak up. Jake's confidence wavered under the weight of the collective anger. He glanced nervously at the crowd, realizing he was losing control of the situation. Still, he refused to admit defeat. Fine, he muttered, tossing Margaret's purse onto the floor. Here's your stupid bag. Enjoy it. With that, he stormed toward the front of the bus, shoving past people as he went. As soon as Jake stepped off the bus, the atmosphere changed completely. The tension dissolved, replaced by cheers and applause. Passengers clapped and whistled, celebrating the fact that justice had been served. Some even approached Margaret, offering words of comfort and support. You handled that beautifully, one woman told her. Don't let him ruin your day. Margaret managed a small smile, though her hands still trembled slightly. She looked up at Dwayne and John, her eyes filled with gratitude. Thank you, she whispered, her voice breaking. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't been here. Dwayne and John smiled warmly, shaking their heads as if to say it was nothing. We're just glad we could help, John said kindly. No one deserves to be treated like that. As the bus continued on its route, the mood remained upbeat. People chatted excitedly about what had happened, marveling at how two strangers had stepped in to protect someone in need. Margaret felt a renewed sense of hope, reminded that there were still good people in the world, and Dwayne and John, they simply returned to their seats, content in knowing they had made a difference, even if it was just on a single morning bus ride. Jake stormed off the bus, his heavy boots pounding against the pavement as he disappeared into the crowded streets of Chicago. The doors closed behind him with a loud hiss, leaving the passengers to breathe a collective sigh of relief. For a moment, no one spoke. The tension that had gripped the bus was finally gone, replaced by a sense of triumph and unity. People exchanged glances, smiling faintly at one another, as if silently acknowledging what they had just witnessed. Margaret sat in her seat, still clutching her purse tightly to her chest. Her hands trembled slightly, but she managed to hold back her tears. She looked around the bus, taking in the faces of the strangers who had come together to support her. Some were nodding encouragingly, others whispering words of comfort. It was a small act of kindness, but it meant the world to her. After everything that had happened, she felt a warmth spreading through her chest, a feeling of gratitude and hope. Dwayne and John remained standing near Margaret's seat, ensuring she was okay before returning to their own spots. John knelt beside her again, his voice gentle as he asked, "Are you sure you're all right? Do you need anything?" Margaret shook her head slowly, offering him a shaky smile. "I'm fine," she said softly. "Thank you. Both of you." Her eyes flickered between Dwayne and John, filled with admiration and relief. "You didn't have to do that. I don't even know how to thank you." Dwayne chuckled lightly, his deep voice soothing. "It's not about thanks," he replied. "We couldn't just sit there and watch someone treat you like that. Nobody deserves that kind of disrespect." John nodded in agreement, adding, "Especially not someone like you. You handled yourself with so much grace even when he was being cruel. That takes real strength." Margaret blushed slightly at the compliment, brushing a strand of gray hair from her face. She wanted to say more, to express just how much their actions meant to her, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she simply murmured another quiet, "Thank you," before looking out the window, trying to steady her emotions. As the bus rumbled along, the mood lightened considerably. Passengers who had been too afraid to speak earlier now began chatting animatedly about what had happened. A young woman sitting near the back leaned forward to ask Dwayne and John if they were really who everyone thought they were. When they confirmed their identities, the bus erupted into cheers once again. People clapped and whistled, thanking them for stepping in and making the ride safer for everyone. One man stood up, raising his hand as if calling for attention. "Excuse me," he called out over the noise. When the chatter died down, he continued, "I just want to say something. Those two gentlemen right there," he pointed to Dwayne and John, "they reminded us all of something important today. We should always stand up for each other no matter who we are or where we come from. They showed us that courage isn't about being the strongest or the loudest, it's about doing what's right, even when it's hard." The passengers erupted into applause again, this time directed at both Dwayne and John and the man who had spoken. Margaret wiped away a tear, touched by the sentiment. Even though she had lived in Chicago her entire life, she had never experienced such a powerful sense of community on public transportation. It made her feel proud to be part of something bigger than herself. For Dwayne and John, the praise was humbling. They waved off the compliments modestly, insisting they had only done what anyone else would have done in their position. But deep down, they knew the truth. Many people might have stayed silent, too afraid to intervene. Their decision to step in wasn't just about protecting Margaret, it was about setting an example. They hoped their actions would inspire others to take a stand against injustice whenever they saw it. As the bus approached Margaret's stop, she gathered her belongings and prepared to leave. Before stepping off, she turned to Dwayne and John one last time. "I'll never forget this," she said earnestly. "Never." "We won't either," John replied with a warm smile. "Take care of yourself, okay?" Margaret nodded and stepped off the bus, disappearing into the crisp autumn air. As the doors closed behind her, the passengers resumed their conversations, buzzing with excitement about what had unfolded. Some pulled out their phones to share the story with friends and family, while others simply basked in the glow of the moment. Dwayne and John returned to their seats, exchanging a quiet look of satisfaction. They hadn't planned to play heroes that morning. They were just two men heading to a charity event. But sometimes life throws unexpected challenges your way, and when it does, you have a choice: to step up or stay silent. Today, they chose to step up. By the time the bus reached its final destination, Word of the incident had already spread beyond the vehicle itself. A teenage girl sitting near the front had filmed part of the confrontation on her phone and uploaded it to social media. Within minutes, the video went viral, capturing the attention of thousands of viewers across the city, and eventually, the country. Comments poured in praising Dwayne and John for their bravery, calling them role models for standing up to bullying. Meanwhile, Jake Miller found himself facing the consequences of his actions. Unbeknownst to him, several passengers had taken photos of him during the altercation. These images, combined with the viral video, made it easy for authorities to identify him. By the end of the day, local news outlets reported that police had issued a warrant for his arrest on charges of assault and theft. His behavior on the bus became a topic of widespread condemnation, with many pointing out the importance of treating others with respect, regardless of age or circumstance. Back at the library, Margaret arrived late to her book club meeting, her mind still replaying the events of the morning. Her friends immediately noticed something was different about her. "Margaret, are you okay?" one of them asked, concern etched on her face. Margaret hesitated for a moment, then decided to share her story. As she recounted the details, the biker's aggression, the spilled purse, and the intervention by two unlikely heroes, her friends listened in awe. By the time she finished, they were all teary-eyed, hugging her tightly and marveling at her resilience. Later that evening, Dwayne and John received messages from fans and followers thanking them for their actions. Many shared stories of times they had witnessed similar incidents but felt powerless to intervene. Their courage on the bus served as a reminder that standing up for others doesn't require superhuman strength. It simply requires a willingness to act. That night, as Margaret lay in bed, she reflected on the day's events. Despite the fear and humiliation she had endured, she felt grateful for the lesson she had learned. Sometimes, even in the darkest moments, good people step forward to remind us that kindness and compassion still exist in the world. And sometimes those good people turn out to be larger-than-life figures who prove that heroes aren't just characters in books. They're real people too. As sleep finally claimed her, Margaret smiled faintly, knowing she would carry the memory of that day with her forever. It wasn't just a story about a biker, a bus, and two celebrities. It was a story about humanity, courage, and the power of standing up for what's right. The days following the incident on the bus felt like a whirlwind for everyone involved. Margaret Thompson, still processing the events of that morning, found herself at the center of attention in ways she never expected. Her story had spread far beyond the confines of the bus, thanks to the viral video posted by a young passenger. Friends, neighbors, and even strangers reached out to express their support, calling her brave and resilient. Though she didn't see herself as particularly courageous, she had simply been trying to survive a terrifying situation. The outpouring of kindness touched her deeply. Margaret's book club meeting became a lively discussion not about literature, but about the power of standing up for one another. Her friends shared stories of times they had witnessed bullying or injustice and admitted feeling powerless to act. Margaret listened intently, nodding along as she realized how much her experience resonated with others. "I wasn't brave," she told them. It was those two men who stepped in. They were the real heroes. Her words sparked a conversation about courage and community. One of her friends suggested organizing a neighborhood event to promote kindness and unity, inspired by what had happened on the bus. The idea quickly gained traction, and before long plans were underway for a small gathering at the local park. Flyers went up around town, inviting people to come together to celebrate acts of bravery and compassion. Margaret, though initially hesitant to take part, eventually agreed to speak briefly at the event. She wanted to share her gratitude and remind others that even small actions could make a big difference. Meanwhile, Jake Miller's life spiraled out of control. The viral video painted him as the villain of the story, and public backlash was swift and unforgiving. Social media users flooded comment sections with criticism, labeling him a bully and demanding accountability. Local news outlets tracked down details about his past, revealing a history of reckless behavior and run-ins with the law. While some argued that he deserved a second chance, Most agreed that his actions on the bus were unacceptable. When police located Jake a few days later, he was visibly shaken. He claimed he hadn't intended to hurt anyone and blamed his behavior on stress and poor decision-making. But excuses did little to sway public opinion or the authorities. Jake was arrested and charged with assault and theft, leaving him to face the consequences of his choices. As he sat in a holding cell, reflecting on the mess he had created, he couldn't help but wonder if things might have turned out differently had he chosen to walk away instead of lashing out. For Dwayne Johnson and John Cena, the aftermath of the bus incident brought both praise and responsibility. Messages poured in from fans around the world, thanking them for stepping in to protect Margaret. Many expressed admiration for their willingness to use their platform for good, while others shared personal stories of being bullied or witnessing abuse. The overwhelming response reminded Dwayne and John of the influence they held, not just as celebrities but as role models. Determined to keep the momentum going, the two men decided to visit Margaret at her home a few days after the incident. They arrived bearing flowers and a basket of treats, hoping to lift her spirits. When Margaret opened the door and saw them standing there, her eyes widened in surprise. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice trembling with emotion. "We wanted to check on you," Dwayne replied with a warm smile. "Make sure you're doing okay." John nodded, holding out the bouquet of flowers. "And we brought these for you, to brighten your day." Margaret accepted the gift, tears welling up in her eyes. "You've already done so much for me," she said softly. "I can't thank you enough." They spent the afternoon chatting over tea, sharing laughs and stories. Margaret showed them photos of her grandchildren and told them about her years as a schoolteacher. In return, Dwayne and John talked about their families, their careers, and their passion for helping others. Despite their fame, they were down to earth and genuine, putting Margaret completely at ease. As the visit came to an end, Dwayne turned serious for a moment. "Margaret, we want you to know something," he said. "What happened on the bus, it wasn't just about you or us. It was about showing people that standing up for each other matters. That's why we're here today, and that's why we'll keep talking about it," John added. "We hope this inspires others to do the same, even if it's something small like helping someone carry groceries or speaking up when someone's being treated unfairly. Every little bit counts." Margaret nodded, her heart swelling with pride and gratitude. She knew she would carry their words with her forever, using them as a reminder to always treat others with kindness and respect. Word of their visit soon spread, further amplifying the message they hoped to convey. News outlets picked up the story, highlighting the bond that had formed between Margaret and her unexpected protectors. Social media buzzed with positivity as users shared posts encouraging random acts of kindness. Some even started hashtags, like stand up like the Rock and Cena, urging others to follow their example. The ripple effect of that single morning on the bus continued to grow. Schools began incorporating discussions about bullying and bystander intervention into their curriculums, using the incident as a real-life case study. Community leaders organized workshops and seminars focused on conflict resolution and empathy. Even businesses got involved, hosting charity drives and fundraising events to support organizations dedicated to combating abuse and promoting equality. For Margaret, the changes were profound. She no longer felt like just another face in the crowd. She had become a symbol of resilience and hope. People approached her on the street to thank her for sharing her story, telling her how it had inspired them to be braver and more compassionate. At first, the attention was overwhelming, but over time she grew to embrace it. She realized that her experience, though painful, had given her a unique opportunity to make a difference. One evening, as Margaret prepared for bed, she paused to reflect on everything that had happened. The fear she had felt on the bus seemed distant now, overshadowed by the love and support she had received since then. She thought about Dwayne and John, two strangers who had changed her life in an instant, and smiled. Though she doubted she would ever fully understand why fate had placed them on that bus that day, she was grateful nonetheless. Before turning off the light, Margaret picked up the notebook she always kept by her bedside. Flipping to a blank page, she began writing, a letter to herself, filled with reminders of the lessons she had learned. "Courage isn't the absence of fear," she wrote. "It's choosing to act despite it. Kindness costs nothing but means everything. And sometimes, heroes aren't who you expect them to be." As she closed the notebook and settled under the covers, Margaret felt a deep sense of peace. The world outside was far from perfect, but moments like the one on the bus proved that goodness still existed, and that ordinary people could do extraordinary things when they stood together. With that thought, she drifted off to sleep, dreaming of brighter days ahead. The days turned into weeks, and the story of the bus incident continued to inspire people far beyond Chicago. Margaret Thompson's quiet bravery and the actions of Dwayne Johnson and John Cena became a beacon of hope for communities everywhere. People began sharing their own stories of standing up against injustice or helping someone in need, creating a wave of positivity that spread across social media platforms and local news outlets. It was as if the simple act of kindness on that crowded bus had sparked a movement, one that reminded everyone of the importance of looking out for one another. Margaret noticed the change in her daily life almost immediately. Strangers greeted her warmly when she walked through her neighborhood, often stopping to thank her for speaking out about her experience. Some shared how her story had encouraged them to be more mindful of others, while others admitted they had finally found the courage to report incidents of bullying or harassment they had witnessed. Margaret listened intently to each person, her heart swelling with pride at the impact her story had made. At the same time, she remained humble, always quick to redirect praise toward Dwayne and John. "I was just an ordinary woman going about my day," she would say. "They were the ones who stepped in when I needed help the most." Her modesty only endeared her further to those around her, and soon, invitations began pouring in for her to speak at schools, community centers, and even local government meetings. Though public speaking wasn't something Margaret had ever imagined doing, she agreed to share her story whenever possible, believing it might inspire others to stand up for what was right. One afternoon, Margaret stood nervously in front of a group of high school students clutching a small note card with bullet points she had jotted down earlier. The room was filled with teenagers, some slouched in their chairs, others scrolling through their phones, clearly uninterested in yet another assembly. But as Margaret began to speak, the atmosphere shifted. She started by describing her routine, morning commute, painting a picture of normalcy before diving into the chaos that unfolded on the bus. Her voice wavered slightly as she recounted Jake Miller's aggression and the fear she felt in that moment. But she quickly regained her composure when she spoke about Dwayne and John stepping in. "They didn't have to do anything," Margaret said, her tone steady now. "They could have stayed seated like everyone else, but instead they chose to act, not because they wanted attention, but because it was the right thing to do. And that's what I want you all to remember. Every single one of us has the power to make a difference. You don't have to be famous or strong or fearless to stand up for someone. All you need is a little courage and a willingness to care." The room fell silent as Margaret finished speaking. For a moment, no one moved, and then applause erupted, filling the auditorium with energy. Students approached her afterward, asking questions and thanking her for sharing her story. One girl shyly admitted that she had been bullied at school and didn't know how to ask for help. Margaret hugged her gently, assuring her that she wasn't alone and encouraging her to reach out to a trusted adult. By the end of the session, Margaret left feeling hopeful, knowing she had planted seeds of change in the minds of young people. Meanwhile, Dwayne and John continued using their platform to amplify the message of kindness and unity. They appeared on talk shows and podcasts, discussing the importance of standing up against bullying and supporting victims of abuse. During one interview, Dwayne leaned forward earnestly, his expression serious. "We're not saying it's easy," he explained. "Sometimes stepping in means putting yourself in harm's way. But think about it this way. If we don't stand up for each other, who will? We're stronger together than we are apart." John nodded in agreement, adding, "It's not just about big gestures either. Even something as simple as checking in on a neighbor or offering a kind word can make a huge impact. We all have the ability to create ripples of goodness in the world." Their words resonated deeply with audiences, prompting countless viewers to take action in their own lives. A mother posted online about teaching her children to speak up if they saw someone being treated unfairly. A teacher organized a kindness week at her school, encouraging students to perform random acts of generosity. A man in another state started a neighborhood watch program after realizing how vulnerable some of his elderly neighbors felt, walking home alone at night. Each story was a testament to the power of leading by example, a lesson Dwayne and John had demonstrated so effectively on that fateful bus ride. Back in Chicago, Jake Miller faced the consequences of his actions. After spending several days in jail awaiting trial, he appeared in court, where prosecutors presented evidence of his aggressive behavior and theft. Witnesses from the bus testified, recounting the fear and humiliation Margaret had endured. Jake sat quietly during the proceedings, his head bowed, seemingly aware of the gravity of his mistakes. When given the chance to speak, he apologized publicly, acknowledging the pain he had caused and promising to seek counseling to address his anger issues. While some dismissed his apology as insincere, others believed he deserved a second chance. Margaret herself expressed mixed feelings about the situation. On one hand, she understood that everyone made poor decisions sometimes. On the other, she couldn't forget the terror she had felt under Jake's glare. Ultimately, she chose to forgive him, not because she condoned his behavior, but because holding on to bitterness felt heavier than letting go. Forgiveness isn't about excusing what happened, she told a reporter later. It's about freeing yourself from the weight of anger. Jake's sentence included community service hours and mandatory anger management classes, along with restitution payments to Margaret for damages caused during the altercation. As part of his rehabilitation, he was required to volunteer at a local shelter, serving meals to those in need. At first, Jake resented the assignment, viewing it as punishment rather than an opportunity. But over time, he began to see the value in giving back. Interacting with people who had experienced hardship softened his hardened exterior, teaching him empathy in ways he hadn't anticipated. By the end of his service, Jake had transformed, in subtle but meaningful ways. He started attending therapy sessions regularly, working through the emotions that had fueled his reckless behavior. He reached out to Margaret, writing her a heartfelt letter expressing remorse and gratitude for her forgiveness. Margaret read the note carefully, her eyes misting over as she considered his words. While she doubted they would ever meet face to face, she appreciated the effort he had made to acknowledge his wrongdoing and strive for growth. As autumn gave way to winter, the city of Chicago embraced the spirit of compassion that had emerged from the bus incident. Decorations went up in shop windows, and holiday lights twinkled along the streets, casting a warm glow over the bustling neighborhoods. Margaret attended the annual tree lighting ceremony in her area, marveling at how much her perspective had changed since the beginning of the season. What had started as a terrifying encounter had blossomed into a journey of healing and connection, reminding her of the resilience of the human spirit. Dwayne and John kept in touch with Margaret, sending her occasional messages and photos of their families. They joked about planning a reunion someday, perhaps inviting her to one of their charity events. Margaret laughed at the idea, though secretly she hoped it might happen. Their friendship had become a source of joy and inspiration, proving that bonds could form in the most unexpected places. On Christmas Eve, Margaret sat by her window, watching snowflakes drift lazily to the ground. She thought about the past few months, the challenges, the triumphs, and the lessons learned. A smile played on her lips as she reflected on the kindness of strangers, the strength of community, and the enduring belief that even in difficult times, good people could come together to create something beautiful. With a contented sigh, she closed her eyes, letting the peacefulness of the evening wash over her. Whatever the new year held, she knew she would face it with courage and hope, carrying the memory of that remarkable day on the bus in her heart forever. As winter deepened and the new year approached, the story of Margaret, Dwayne, John, and even Jake continued to ripple outward, touching lives in ways no one could have predicted. The message of standing up for others, showing kindness, and finding strength and unity had taken root in the hearts of many. People from all walks of life were inspired by the simple yet powerful act of courage that unfolded on that ordinary bus ride. For Margaret, it became clear that her experience was more than just a personal story. It was a catalyst for change. Margaret spent her days feeling both grateful and amazed at how much her world had shifted. She received letters and emails from people across the country who had been moved by her bravery. Some shared their own struggles with bullying or abuse, while others thanked her for giving them the courage to speak out when they saw someone being mistreated. One letter stood out among the rest. It came from a young boy named Ethan who wrote about how he had stood up for a classmate being teased at school. "I thought about what you said," Ethan wrote. "Even if I'm scared, I can still do the right thing. Thank you for teaching me that." Margaret read the letter over and over, tears streaming down her face. She realized that her story wasn't just about her anymore. It was about everyone who had found hope and strength in her words. Determined to keep the momentum going, she began volunteering at a local community center, leading workshops on empathy and conflict resolution. Her sessions were simple but impactful, focusing on real-life scenarios and practical advice. "We're all stronger than we think," she would tell her audience, "and together, we can make our communities safer and kinder." At the same time, Dwayne and John remained committed to spreading the message of compassion and resilience. They traveled to different cities, speaking at schools, charities, and events about the importance of using their voices and actions to uplift others. During one visit to a youth center in Los Angeles, Dwayne knelt down to talk to a group of kids playing basketball. "You guys are the future," he told them, his voice warm and encouraging. "Every time you choose to help someone instead of ignoring them, you're making the world better. Don't ever forget that." John echoed this sentiment during a panel discussion on bullying prevention. "It's not always easy to step in," he admitted. "Sometimes it feels easier to look away. But imagine if no one had stepped in for Margaret that day. Imagine how different things might have been. That's why we need to be brave, not just for ourselves, but for each other." Their efforts inspired countless individuals to take action. Teachers incorporated lessons on bystander intervention into their classrooms. Parents taught their children the value of standing up for others. Even businesses joined the movement, launching campaigns to support anti-bullying organizations and promote inclusivity. The ripple effect of that single morning on the bus seemed endless, proving that small acts of courage could spark widespread change. Back in Chicago, Jake Miller worked hard to rebuild his life. His time volunteering at the shelter had opened his eyes to the struggles faced by those less fortunate, and he found himself wanting to do more. He started attending meetings for recovering addicts and those struggling with anger management, sharing his own experiences in hopes of helping others avoid the mistakes he had made. Though progress was slow, Jake remained determined to turn his life around. One evening, as he walked home from a meeting, Jake spotted Margaret sitting on a park bench feeding breadcrumbs to a flock of pigeons. He hesitated, unsure whether approaching her was a good idea, but something inside him urged him to try. Taking a deep breath, he stepped forward cautiously. "Mrs. Thompson?" he called softly. Margaret looked up, startled at first, then surprised, to see Jake standing there. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, Jake broke the silence. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness," he began, his voice trembling slightly. "But I wanted to thank you for everything, your kindness. It changed me. I've been trying to fix my life, and I couldn't have done it without seeing how strong you were." Margaret studied him carefully, noting the sincerity in his expression. After a pause, she nodded slowly. "Thank you for saying that," she replied gently. "I won't lie, it wasn't easy to forgive you, but holding on to anger only hurts us in the end. I hope you keep working toward becoming the person you want to be." Jake nodded, visibly moved by her words. "I will," he promised. "And I'll never forget what you've taught me." The encounter left Margaret deeply reflective. She returned home that night, sitting by her window as snowflakes drifted lazily outside. She thought about how far everyone involved in the bus incident had come, the growth, the healing, and the connections formed along the way. What had once seemed like a terrifying ordeal had transformed into a testament to the power of compassion and redemption. By spring, the neighborhood park where Margaret often took her evening strolls hosted a special event organized by local leaders. Dubbed the Day of Unity, it brought together residents of all ages to celebrate acts of kindness and community spirit. Booths lined the pathways, offering activities like writing thank you notes, planting flowers, and creating art projects, centered around themes of empathy and courage. At the center of it all stood a stage where speakers, including Margaret, shared stories of resilience and hope. When Margaret stepped up to the microphone, the crowd fell silent, eager to hear her speak. She smiled warmly, her hands gripping the podium lightly. "A few months ago, I never imagined I'd be standing here today," she began. "I was just an ordinary woman living an ordinary life. But sometimes, life gives us opportunities to do extraordinary things, not because we're special, but because we care enough to try." She paused, scanning the faces before her. Courage isn't about being fearless. It's about choosing to act, even when you're scared. Kindness isn't about grand gestures. It's about the little things we do every day to lift each other up. And forgiveness? Forgiveness is about letting go of pain so we can move forward together. Her words resonated deeply with the audience, drawing cheers and applause. As she stepped away from the microphone, Dwayne and John appeared on stage, surprising her with a bouquet of flowers and a hug. "You're the real hero here," Dwayne said, his voice filled with admiration. "No," Margaret replied, shaking her head. "We all are." The event ended with music, laughter, and a sense of unity that lingered long after the sun set. Families gathered around picnic tables, sharing meals and stories. Children played tag on the grass, their laughter echoing through the air. It was a reminder that even in a world filled with challenges, moments of connection and kindness could bring people together in profound ways. In the weeks that followed, Margaret continued to live her life with a renewed sense of purpose. She stayed in touch with Dwayne and John, exchanging updates and photos. Occasionally, she thought about Jake, hoping he was finding peace and purpose in his journey. Her mornings remained peaceful, filled with tea, books, and quiet reflection. Yet she carried within her the knowledge that even the smallest actions could create waves of change. As summer arrived, bringing warmer days and longer evenings, Margaret sat on her porch, watching Whiskers chase a butterfly in the garden. She thought about the bus ride that had changed everything, the fear, the courage, and the unexpected friendships that had emerged from it. Life, she realized, was unpredictable, but it was also beautiful, full of moments waiting to be seized and shared. With a contented sigh, Margaret leaned back in her chair, closing her eyes as the breeze rustled the leaves above her. She didn't know what the future held, but she was ready for whatever came next. After all, she had learned that even in the darkest moments, light could shine through, and that sometimes heroes weren't just characters in stories. They were real people like her, like Dwayne and John, and yes, even like Jake. Together, they proved that humanity's greatest strength lay in its ability to care for one another, and that was a lesson worth carrying forever.